You like it?
Yeah.
More than life, inspired, bold. I have to say that this book made me a philosopher. I actually took a semester where we read nothing but Confessions for the entire semester. And you might think, wow, that's a lot of time on one book. But we don't take enough time to read things slowly these days. We really don't. And also, almost all of Augustine's philosophy is in some sort of nut form in this book. As you read, say, The City of God, or his Philosophy of Beauty, or any other of these sorts of things, you'll find, I'm constantly going back and finding passages where I'm like, oh, he was already thinking about this way back when. This is a book he's writing right after he becomes bishop. But I'd like to ask you a question while I'm writing something for the board. Why would he write, now that you've gotten to the end, and we will deal with the Trinity, but we'll deal with it mostly next week. Now that you've gotten to the end of this book, why did he write this book? Why would he write it in this way? Any theories, any thoughts? I mean, let's think about this for a minute. He's got a narrative portion, and then he, book 10, starts talking about memory. Book 11, he starts talking about time and eternity. This is what starts me thinking about my district dissertation. Go ahead, come back.
Like, he wrote it to show that, only God can bring you to conversion, that you can't really be convinced through, regular philosophy.
Okay, how does he do that? That's good.
There was a part, I can't remember which book it was, 8 or 9, where, he, extols the Catholics for not, having too many arguments, and it just really comes down to faith, they really said, so, he puts great emphasis on that, and the garden conversion. So.
Okay, good. So we've got this issue of faith and reason going on here. What is it the Catholic Church can add? What can you get to naturally on your own? Does anyone want to add something to that? Because this is a good start, because that's exactly right. What other things do you, when you read it, why would you read a book like this? Shout out, anyone? Okay, well, let me frame this in a slightly different manner. Why on earth, this is one of the first autobiographies. This is 12, by the way. And this is a 13. 7 days. When we think of the Confessions as probably one of the first autobiographies. But as you saw, we read earlier, Hilary of Poitiers at the beginning of his On the Trinity gives a certain kind of exposition of how he comes to think, right? It's very short. We're finding more and more autobiographies, but this is mostly autobiography. And I want you to think about for a minute. Go ahead.
I was just going to ask if maybe it was supposed to reflect people's own prayers to God, their own questions that they have.
Good. The concept of confession isn't just, you've got confession of sins, right? But you also have, this book is clearly a prayer, and we're going to see this when we read Anselm. He writes the Monologion as mostly a philosophical inquiry, but when he writes the Proslogion, he's writing a prayer. He's writing it to God, pros, to. So the Confessions is a form of prayer. It's a form of confession of sin to whom? To God. But why? God knows his sin.
Maybe it's something that people can look at and relate to. So
okay, to people. Good. And I'm going to add the next one to himself, because I think it's going to be crucial with bringing it in. He's writing it. When you say a prayer, and Augustine does a lot of thinking about why would someone say a prayer, right? God knows your thoughts. He knows what you're going to ask. He knows what you need. Why would you pray? especially in private. In public, you can say it maybe for the benefit of the hearers, but in private, Augustine's going to say, it also forms you. The practice of prayer somehow shapes your mind, shapes your memory, shapes your thoughts. One of the things I'd like to suggest to you is one of the reasons why he's going to be so enamored with memory. I mean, book 10 is a long book. I don't know about you, but I have to take a break in between like the beginning and the end, because it's a long book and it's a long exposition. And the reason why he does that, though, is memory is the precondition for confession, right? Memory is that by which one can understand, we understand ourselves. One of the things that attracted me to Augustine when I first came to him was this I was a college student like you, constantly going about here, there, and everywhere, and never feeling like, and I was changing from one day to the next. I mean, in college, these 4 years, you change a lot. What makes you the same person? I actually met Richard Saraji like my freshman year, and he really bothered me by this whole thing. What makes you the same person your freshman year to your senior year? Is there any basis of continuity in that? Like, you're not the same, you're constantly changing. What makes you the same person? And for Augustine, part of what makes you the same person, part of the ways in which human beings have a kind of rest and identity is in memory, because it's a part of the divine image in humanity. So that's somewhat by way of introduction, but I wanted to present to you, I mean, there are two kind of big questions, and then I'll go through a more ordered argument here, but there are two big questions when people read the Confessions. One is, what exactly is happening in the garden, right? What does conversion mean to him? Because it takes him a full year to get baptized. But he seems to have little conversion experiences along the way, and he becomes a Platonist, and he thinks this is a step to God. And he has all of these little steps. But what's happening in the garden? And the second question is, why on earth would he, and this really bothered, because literature scholars like this book too. You know, it's got a lot generically. Why would he end it with so much philosophy? Right? I mean, for us, we're like, all right. For them, they're like, finally we're getting to the good stuff. But most literary people are like, okay, this is an autobiography. I like the salacious details. I think you're a little bit much Augustine with the whole pear tree episode. But then you just bore me by not even just talking philosophically, but talking philosophically in circles and in commentary on scripture. What? Right? Okay. So what I'd like to suggest to you and argue is that the Confessions is written as an example. An example of how one converts, but also an example of, because, let me put it this way. In our modern age, we think that we individually are important. In the ancient medieval world, people were so silly, right? Like, they weren't as silly to think that everyone should know your own salacious details. I'm sorry, but the Kardashians, who cares, right? Like, in the ancient world, that was viewed as too much information to too many people. I mean, Augustine would probably have a lot of things to say about Facebook. But they were able to do this. When you talk about your personal life, talk about your personal life because it's designed to help other people. That's why you do it. It's the only reason why you do it. You don't talk about your personal life just because you want to share yourself and talk about how the kind of urges you have in the night. No, you do it as an example. And so Augustine has a narrative argument and a philosophical argument. And sometimes it's hard for us to see the philosophical argument because ancient philosophy is frequently circular and because people kind of ruminate, but it's also frequently done in commentary. Some of the best Platonist philosophy is done in commentaries on Plato. Treatises, not so much. So philosophical, he's got his narrative part and his philosophical part. They're both arguments for this reason. It's clear, here's the thing. All philosophy purports to be seeking the happy life. Purports to be seeking the happy life in truth. Because, I mean, who wants to lie, really? So you're seeking the happy life, you're seeking it in truth, you're seeking God. Why don't you find Him? Why don't you find the happy life? What are the major obstacles? Why is it that some people see beauty in the flower and it makes them think of God, and some people see beauty in the flower and they see nothing but the flower? Why is it that my friend, a pathologist, looks at the thing and says, that diseased cell is ugly? I'm like, oh, I don't know what that is. And why is it that, but then she looks at that healthy cell and she says, that's beautiful. Why is it that some people see things and other people don't see things? We're all seeing the same thing. We've all got minds. We've all got the world out there. What's going on? And he's going to hand it to the Platonist, and I'm just going to give you the two main things, and then we'll go through the details. One, that is an intellectual problem. Sure, you're not thinking clearly. You're not seeking it. I mean, Augustine, Plato, and all of them, they're all not seeking it. But then he's going to say, but it's also a long haul problem of the will. We have divided wills, and it's sin that prevents us from thinking clearly. And he's going to do a lot of thinking about how it is that sin causes difficulty in our ability to philosophize. We don't like to think about it, but let's face it. If you've ever dealt with someone who's depressed and tried to get them to go to the doctor, do they want to admit they're depressed most of the time? No. Do they want to go see the doctor most of the time? No. Do they need to see the doctor? Yes. The truth is there. It's right. It's causing them problems, but they're not doing anything about it, and it doesn't matter what you say to them. They're not going to do anything about it because all of us inherently have some sort of problem. So we're going to see a certain kind of chiasm. If that word doesn't mean anything, just ignore it. But if it does, in the way in which he presents his narrative argument versus his philosophical argument. In his narrative argument, Augustine's going to show, and has shown, what it is, how he came to faith as a philosopher, as someone for whom the intellectual problems of conversion, we'll call this hindrances, he thinks that the intellectual problems are the primary problem for him. He's trying to figure out the nature of God and the nature of evil. But he says, and as he's doing this, that he's pursuing this in an evil way. And he's trying his hardest to pursue this, what seems like a good thing, but he's doing it in the wrong way. But the first step along the way, and now I'm going to talk a little bit about his narrative argument, and we'll go into philosophical argument. The first step along the way that kind of moves him from Manichaeanism and this concept of dualism and the idea of there being a good substance and a bad substance is going to be Platonism. And Augustine says he's glad that Platonism, that he encounters it before he really encounters the church or scripture. I mean, he reads scripture early in his life and he's like, this is trash. It doesn't really appeal to me. But he encounters Platonism first, and it hits him first because he realizes that within Platonism, there's a lot of what you find in John 1, which, as we've been talking about, is in some sense the commentary on Genesis 1. Well, what do you mean by that? What kinds of things might you find in Platonism, as we've discussed, that he refined in the Gospel of John, chapter 1, in the beginning? What's the word?
Also about logos, how that reveals the truth.
Yeah, so he's going to find the logos, he's going to find the truth, and the truth is making things, and it's the light that shines in the darkness. What other sorts of things might he have found? Creation, I mean, okay, maybe you didn't read.
In the beginning was the Word.
In the beginning was the Word. So God, there's nothing, thank you. There's nothing before God. It's hard for us to think about this for a minute, and this is one of the intellectual problems. Go ahead, come back.
I'm sorry, they said that the beginning, it's a John quote.
Right.
In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God. So that in the beginning there was both the Word and God, or God is the Word.
Yeah, so we've got this kind of concept of God being the Logos, and they're together, and so we've got the hints of the Trinity. And a lot of Christians believe that Plato had the Trinity. But what I want to focus your mind on is this concept of there's nothing before God. Because there are certain things that the human mind have a difficulty comprehending. One is nothingness. The other is things that don't have to do with time. And the third is anything that's not substantial. And God is the ultimate existence, but he's not a substance, and he's before all things. So without him there's nothing. It's not a good and evil dichotomy. It's a good, there's God and nothing. And he realizes from the Platonists that the root of evil is not some sort of evil substance, but the misdirection of the affections and of the will. So he gets all of these things from the Platonists. But he says what he doesn't find in the Platonists, that he does find in the Gospel of John, is incarnation. Jesus Christ, the Word becoming flesh, human beings in need of salvation, this kind of divided will that cannot be overcome through intellectual exercise. Augustine doesn't find these in the Platonists. By the way, we think he's probably written Plotinus, as translated by Marius Victorinus. And if you're ever interested in what precise books of Victorinus we think of Plotinus Augustine had, talk to me, got a list. But he has, so this is an intellectual conversion. He's coming to realize that there's no good and evil, there's just good. Evil is a perversion of the will. But he's becoming aware that that's not enough. He's becoming aware that the Christian God is probably the God. He's becoming aware, though just vaguely, that even when he thinks about God in this way as immaterial, he can't wrap his head around it. If he tries to imagine God as being immaterial, he's not successful. And so we get to the book of his conversion. And what is it that leads him to faith? It's a bunch of stories and testimonies of people who come to faith like him. Victorinus is a rhetor, is an academic, just like him. He publicly confesses Christ before men. Anthony, this monk who's unlearned, gets what he's been looking for all his life. I mean, get this into your head, because a lot of times our philosophy, what we consider to be philosophy, isn't necessarily a way of life. Especially for the Romans at this time, the ultimate goal of philosophy is seeing the good, having the vision, seeing the light. It's only a glimpse, but if you just have a glimpse, that's what you want. And the philosophers are the ones who get to have it, right? It's being intellectual, it's being a lot of aesthetic practice. Philosophy and religion aren't so far apart in this Roman period. So Augustine is sitting here looking at this unlearned monk named Anthony, who has this vivid vision of God, and Augustine's been seeing his entire life. He's been an athlete in training. He's been doing the best he can intellectually. And this unlearned monk just gets it. What's up with that? He's jealous. But it's not until he gets into the garden and he's experiencing the divided will. And this is where I would like to say, Plato plays a major role kind of in his intellectual conversion, but Paul and the two wills plays a major role in his actual narrative conversion experience, because he's describing for you this kind of, he knows the good, He knows that Christianity is the way at this point, and he doesn't want to do it. Why? Why doesn't he want to? He's hearing all of these conversion experiences. It's tearing him up inside. He knows the right thing to do. Why is he not doing it? This is where narrative helps, because we can talk all day about divided wills and whatever, but when you read Augustine, if you ever get a chance to read Augustine's story, hear him describe this kind of angst that he has. What is it that's preventing him? I mean, why doesn't he just convert if he knows what's the right, that Christianity is the true religion?
I might be wrong, but wasn't it like the marriage that he had set up and everything? Like, it was completely divided?
Yeah, really. I mean, honestly, for Augustine, and this is going to cause havoc for Western philosophy, but Augustine, I'm serious, he's a bit, caught up in these sorts of things, but essentially at the age of 16, because at that time period, I mean, frankly, if you guys were to get married today, an undergraduate, would your parents be happy? Most of them. I mean, some parents might be okay with it, but most parents probably wouldn't. Because why? Marriage is going to be a hindrance for your future success. Get your success first, then get married. That's what most of your parents are going to say, because that's what worldly wisdom says, and that's what Augustine's parents were saying to him. And so he's like, okay, I can't get married. Marriage is a social institution at this point in time, so I'm going to take a concubine, and I'm going to have son with her. And yeah, so Augustine has this concubine, and he really loves her. But then he has to put her away because his parents would have arranged a socially advantageous marriage for him. And he, does things that he probably ought not to be doing in the meantime, right? So he's addicted to sex. Frankly, he's addicted to sex, and he doesn't want to give it up. And this is the particular big thing. He wants to be an athlete. If he was okay with being just an okay average Joe Schmo Christian, it would be fine. He would convert, he'd get married, there's nothing wrong with that. But oh no, Augustine is a perfectionist, as are that many of you. Augustine is a perfectionist, and therefore he wants the best, and he knows that if you want to be perfect in the Christian life, in his mind, that's the best people, the athletes, don't get married. They stay celibate. And he wants, if he's going to do it, he wants to be perfect. So he's torn, like dozens of different directions. On the one hand, he can't give up whores. And on the other hand, he wants to be this perfect saint. Like it's just this, and he doesn't, and maybe he can be married, but that's not gonna, he just can't stand it, right? And he's just wandering around in this house of a friend, just, crazy. And what does he do? He's like, he hears this, take and read. We don't know if there's a child's game like this. I mean, he was constantly fascinated by fate and fortune. And actually the table that the book of Paul is supposed to have been on, we now think it's a game. So he's like playing. I mean, there's so much, he's playing with the concept of chance. And so he opens up, bad reader, right? Bad reader, but the bad reading helps. He just opens it up to wherever it is open. And what does he find? Paul, book of Romans. Take no thought for the flesh, but put you on the Lord Jesus Christ. And now to us, we're like, what? But he sees this as a sign. It says to him, don't get married, don't put away all kinds of fleshly desires, and get baptized. Because put you on the Lord Christ at that time was understood to be get baptized. And it's at this point where he says, okay, I'm going to make a decision, but I'm going to make a decision that makes me humble. Basically, I take this kind of grace that trusts that God will help me do what I know that I can't do on my own. And so it's this concept of grace that he finds just so, but it's this concept of grace that he finds in baptism that allows him to do certain things that he never was able to do in his own will in his own intellectual endeavor. And there are two kind of litmus tests that he uses in the final part of his narrative, because you've got this conversion experience where it breaks, where he's had this battle of wills, and he just, okay, God, I'll be baptized. And then the things that he had been seeking all along happen. And they happen in the most unusual way, because he'd been wanting that vision of God's light. And he has it. He has it after he's baptized, and he has it while talking to his mother Monica, who's completely illiterate, completely unworthy. But it is in this discussion, because you know, in Platonism, this assent can often happen in discussion, but it's frequently between a philosopher and his kind of philosophical pupil, right? And this kind of discussion raises you up. Oh no, it doesn't happen like that for Augustine. Augustine has this assent with his mother. The learned have their own way of getting to God. The unlearned, but somehow the two in this concept of the happy life are able to ascend equally, regardless of how smart you are. And then finally, when his mother dies, there's this kind of parallel between what happens when his mother, Monica, dies, because she's seen her son convert, she's seen her husband convert, and what happened when his best friend died. She'll remember when his best friend died, he was in love with grief. Oh my goodness, he was a drama queen. Like, he was just like, oh, I miss my friend. He betrayed me at the end. It's so horrible. And really, he's just weeping and wailing and gnashing, and it's not pretty, it's not stoic. And you know what? He's more interested in himself than he is interested in having lost his friend. And he knows it. But he gets to the end when his mother dies, and he cries. He does. And he says, don't, may no one judge me. I mean, at this time, understand, Cicero had to defend the fact that he cried over the death of his daughter. There's a certain kind of Roman concept of controlling one's emotions being the highest way. But Cicero says, look, I have a real, tangible loss in the loss of my daughter. I'm not going to have an inordinate amount of grief, but I'm going to grieve. And so when Monica dies, when Augustine's mother dies, he grieves. But it's about his mother, and it's about the loss of his mother. It's not about himself. And it's not inordinate. It's not overblown. And at the end of the day, he knows, and he talks about this. He prays, he says that one of the reasons why he's written this book is that as a memorial to his mother, who prayed for him this entire time. And he says, may everyone pray for her. And this is one of the reasons why Catholics consider Monica to be a saint, because theoretically, everyone who's read the Confessions has prayed for Monica. I mean, that's not necessarily completely true, but enough people have that surely she's in heaven. But more than that, Augustine says, in the end, he's imagining his mother before the throne of God, and the great serpent Satan, the dragon, accusing her, and her not saying, her saying, I confess I'm a sinner, but I trust in the Lord Jesus Christ for my salvation, and he took away my sins and he paid for them. If you look at the very end of book 9, it's just this kind of picture of her standing before the throne of God and Augustine imagining that. So Augustine is a changed man. Augustine's a changed man. He's had the philosophical vision he always wanted. It's now bearing fruit in his life. But at the end of the day, does that mean he continues to be without struggle? We have a sense that no, in these last books, he doesn't talk a lot about what happens in his life. If you ever want a really good biography of Augustine, Peter Brown's book on Augustine is a good kind of overarching, full life story of Augustine. But what Augustine says is that he's always been struggling and he always will be struggling. So now let's switch to this philosophical argument for a minute. He begins to think about why it is that he can confess, and why it is that he can remember remember the things that have happened to him in his life. And by remembering, he becomes a whole person, right? Because he's remembering in light of God, he's remembering this stream of events, and it's in that memory he feels whole. But he begins to think about the mystery of memory, and a lot of what you will find, especially in book 10 and book 11, are sort of paradoxes he sets up that you can go back to and think about. But he has basically he creates a picture of memory, a philosophy of memory, that is a mixture of Aristotle's psychology at base and Paul's psychology of the two wills. And let me talk a little bit about how these kind of meditate upon how these two things come together. According to Aristotle, most of what we have in our memory, most of what we have in our mind is images, right? You are looking at, I see you guys as guests. I store up images in my mind, and these images allow me to remember the past. And then you have a second kind of memory that is actually more than images. It's the things themselves, and this comes from the liberal arts. Logic, rhetoric, grammar, these things are not sensual images that are just stored up in the bank of your minds. These are the things themselves. There's something, they're a reality that you remember. And but the question that Augustine poses is, what is the sensation of forgetting? Aristotle didn't really talk much about that. I mean, what's happening when I forget something? And I mean, it's kind of a ghost of a memory almost. And normally, when I forget something, I knew it in the past, but I don't know it now. What is it? And so he kind of moves from this concept of what is forgetting to, why do I seek the happy life? Why do I seek the good life? And he says, it's a commonly known, according to him, it's a commonly known thought we all seek the good life. We all want to be happy. Why do we think, why do we do that? Why do we do that given the fact that none of us have ever seen the happy life? The happy life is one of those things that we're pursuing. We seem to try to remember by thinking about it, but we've never seen it. How is this? Why do we do that? And so he talks about this, the restless heart. And you remember at the very beginning of his narrative, he talks about our hearts are restless, O Lord, until they rest in thee. Is the restless heart a form of forgetting? Like, have we forgotten something? Are we longing for something that we've seen in the past? What's going on here? And what is it that we are longing for? Because the fun thing about forgetting is that we don't remember what it is we're looking for. Like, we have this hazy, okay, I remember I lost something. What did I lose again? I don't remember. Go ahead.
What about having the memory of something, not necessarily longing for it, but just being like, I have seen the happiest thing I can think of, and I remember that, so I have it. So I know what it is.
I mean, that's it. What you're getting at, which I think is good, and I don't think he gets at enough, is the ways in which human beings extrapolate from, okay, I have this moment of happiness, and from that moment of happiness, I have this concept of a happiness that doesn't end. I have a concept of something but where does that concept come from? And so that's what Augustine's going to ask is, where does that concept come from? And then finally, why is it that some people find it and some people don't? Because he has this concept of God being, the memory has a certain relationship to God as truth. And now I feel like I'm just running roughshod over this metaphysics because it's too complicated, and I hope you go back and look at it. But the concept is that God is truth. And there's something about God being truth, God being logos, that that both creates the world according to this truth, and thus the world is speaking to us, but also gives us the kinds of minds that have the ability to perceive the truth, to perceive that we are looking for something that's called the good life, and to seek for it in God as truth. But then the next kind of half of this book is spent thinking about what our hindrances are and what our volitional hindrances are. So this is what I was talking about with the chiasm, and when he talks about his conversion, he goes from intellect to will. But when he starts thinking about it, he goes from will to intellect because he thinks, okay, I am relying upon a mind that is fallible. And it seems to be hindered by something. Those same tools that enable my mind to work also prevent it from working. And so he thinks about this. And he basically classifies it, you would find it in John, three hindrances: the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life. Basically, what he means by this is that all of the senses, which are designed and given to you to know and perceive the truth, can be misused. You know that that eating is necessary for health, but do you just eat for health? Oh no. You gorge in the pleasure. You know that sex is meant for procreation, for families, for love, but do you just do that? Oh no, you don't. And he talks about that. This is great. The last bit, the pride of life, which I find fascinating because a lot of people are like, I'm not prideful. He's like, he gets you both ways, right? He's like, everybody seeks praise. Everybody wants to be praised. And so you're going to try to be proud in your intellect. And then if you're not proud in your intellect, he'll be like, then there are the people who are proud in not knowing. They're proud in being to a place, I don't care. I mean, they're really proud of not caring. I mean, it's funny. My dad's best friend in college was like this with clothes. He's like, I don't care what I wear. I'll wear anything. And my dad was like, and then his friend had recently gotten married, and his wife, he came down, and his wife said, "You're not wearing that. I'm sorry. You're not wearing that. Go back upstairs and change." And he came back, dutifully went upstairs, changed, and came back down. And then my dad's best friend was just like, I just don't understand. I don't care what I wear. I don't know why he cares what he wears. Just like, no. My dad says, no, he doesn't care what he wears, so he's just going to do what his wife says. You care about not caring what you wear, right? So this is a form of pride. So you can either be proud of being an intellectual, or you can be proud in being not an intellectual. At Baylor, we have these people in Nose Brothers. You can get it either by having a 4.0 or by having the lowest GPA possible. Like 2 scores, that's the way you get in. So basically, what Augustine says is, as he's thinking about this, is our minds are okay. They're being hindered by the very senses that were given to us to apprehend. And I'd love to talk a little bit more, and I'll just talk a little bit about time and form here, because in addition to us having sinful reasons for not perceiving truth, basically we misuse the senses, we misuse our mind, we don't actually pursue the truth when we say that we want to pursue the truth. We both want something and we don't want it all at the same time. There are legitimate intellectual reasons for us to have difficulty in pursuing God. Namely, that God is outside of time and He's not material. And our minds are essentially time-bound and matter-bound. I mean, and Kant talks about this. I mean, he kind of criticizes Locke's concept of tabula rasa and says, are we born without anything in our minds? No, we have certain structures. We have certain, and time and matter are, time and space. We put everything within these categories. We can't operate without these categories. They exist and they allow us to function as minds. And yet we're trying to comprehend something that is neither temporal nor spatial. We're attempting to square a circle, essentially, but more than that. I mean, what Augustine is saying, has any of you seen the book Flatland? Tiny book, but it's a really good, I mean, I encourage you to look at it. It's about a bunch of characters who are in the 2D world, two-dimensional world, who have an encounter with the three-dimensional world. And think about it, if you were two-dimensional, if you were a fish, can you imagine being outside of water, not unless you were dead? Like, I mean, our minds, our very minds themselves, are not quite set up to deal with a being like God. So we have, in addition to having sinful reasons for not, that hinder our memory, and just limitations, our memory is fallible. We talk about that. It forgets things. We also have intellectual reasons in the sense that our minds are not structured. We are both structured to want God, but not structured to understand Him. Is essentially what he said. The mind has a sense that we're pursuing God, and yet that God is somehow just beyond our grasp. And if you get, I don't even know if you made it to book 13. It's a long reading, but in book 13, he will, and really in book 12 and 13, he's gonna. All of these are commentaries, in a sense, on the book of Genesis, which caused a lot of issues for him when he was converting, and almost all the major points in his life, when his wife, when his mother dies, when his son dies, when he becomes bishop, all of these sorts of things. He almost always complicates the book of Genesis. But what I'd like for you to get from this last book, in the book of the 7 days, is it shows how the book comes together and has multiple structures, is he ends with the Sabbath. He basically ends with the seventh day is a day of rest. And that's essentially what we're all hoping for. We're all hoping for a rest by being whole. We're all hoping for finding what it is we're seeking. And we're the kind of creatures that aren't just content to smell roses. We have to think about what makes a rose a rose. We're that kind of creature. And until we are whole in our memory, and thus, confessing one's life narrative gives a wholeness to it, but confessing one's life narrative in the form of a prayer gives a higher level of wholeness, because there's a God that sees the whole in ways that Augustine admits even now that his own memory is fallible and his own perception is fallible. And if you ever read if you ever read Derrida's Circumventions, you'll see how he plays on this in the opposite way, because within Derrida's, well, he doesn't really have an ontology, but within his kind of concept of the world, memory is primarily something that humans have. So when his mother gets Alzheimer's, the parts of his life that he doesn't remember, he doesn't remember. He's gone. He's stripped away. There's nothing left of him. Because within his concept of the world, if your identity is linked wholly into memory, and there's only one person in this world who knows you from the very beginning, and she's dying of Alzheimer's, so her memory is not even good right now, you're not a whole person. You're in fact stripping away like a blood circumcision. But that's Derrida for you. So, the point here is Augustine has a very different take on the world, which is that we have a taste for something we've never seen. And that taste is a hint of a memory, of a joy, of a longing that is rest, that he finds encapsulated in the Sabbath rest. So that's all we have time for today. We'll do some more Augustine and Boethius and talk about